So in this video, we're going to take a look at the structure of numbers, sort of the family tree of numbers. So let's start with what we call real numbers. Now, a real number is any number you can think of. So let's write down a few examples of real numbers and take a look at them, right? So for example, 1 is a real number. 0 is a real number. -1 is a real number. Now, you don't have to just stay with these kinds of real numbers. There could be numbers like this: 1/3, fractions, 5/4, fractions, 4 fraction, right? Now, I know that can be reduced to 1/2, and so on. So these are also real numbers. Decimals. So we know 0.3333 forever is 1/3. You can get decimals that have a repeating pattern like 1, 2, and they stop, or any most decimal numbers you can think of. Any decimal number you can think of is a real number. Now this includes some very funky numbers such as pi, 3.1415, and so on. The thing about pi, and there's something very special about pi which is very different to 0.3333, the one above it. Now the thing about pi is that this decimal place here, that decimal place goes on forever, and has no pattern. Has no pattern to it. No repeating pattern to it. Okay, it's different to say 0.3333 where there's a repeating pattern, it goes on forever. So 0.3333. Now, when you talk about a fraction, these fractions, and all of these are real numbers, these fractions here, when you actually convert a fraction into a decimal, it's going to fall into one of two types. It's going to be one of these repeating infinite decimals, or it's going to be a decimal that stops. So for example, this 5/4 is 1.25, right? If you did the division, so that's a decimal that stops. 1/2 is a decimal that stops. Or if we did 10/6, now that's a decimal that repeats over and over again with a pattern. So you can check these out for yourself, but essentially any number you can think of is a real number. Now the first split in our numbers family tree comes into what's called irrational numbers and rational numbers, right? So irrational numbers, let me spell that right, erase, irrational numbers and rational numbers. So that's the first split. Okay, so they're all real numbers, both of these, but within the real number family we can talk of rational numbers and irrational numbers. So irrational numbers are not numbers you can talk calmly to. Okay, they're just strange numbers. So these numbers here, the best way to describe these are numbers that have both infinite decimal and no pattern. Right? So this is the trickiest one to understand, this split right here that you're looking at. So they have, irrational numbers have infinite, the decimal place goes on forever, infinite numbers of decimal places, and there is no pattern, no repeating pattern. So 0.3333, for example, although it goes on forever, is not a irrational number, it's a rational number. Okay, so irrational numbers are numbers like pi. So example here would be a number like pi. Okay. Other examples of irrational numbers are square root of 2, square root of 3, square root of 5. Okay. And so basically these prime numbers, if you take the square root of these, they're going to be irrational. Not only that, if you take the square root of something like 12, because 12 is made up of 2 times 6, and 2 is irrational, 12 is irrational. Okay, so keep that in mind. These irrational numbers are really odd. They have decimal places that go on forever, and when you look at those decimal places that go on forever, you're not going to see any kind of pattern to them. It's very random, the numbers. Okay. So rational numbers, in here, into the side of rational numbers, you get fractions, you get integers, you get decimals that repeat, decimals that go on forever, decimals that stop. So one could, if we were looking over here on our right hand side, all of these, all of those would be rational. And so these are all rational numbers. Right? And irrational, we have one example sitting here, and I've written more examples there you can see on the left, okay, of irrational numbers. Now you might sit there thinking, well, boy, there's probably a whole lot more rationals than irrational, but it's actually the other way around. Turns out that there are way more irrational numbers than there are rational numbers. Okay, but that's another topic altogether. But suffice it to say, we can now tell the difference between rational and irrational. Now these rationals, they break up a couple of different ways as well. So if you take a rational number, that is an integer, breaks up as an integer, and of course a non-integer. Okay, and so in our little example right there, we can sort of circle in blue the integers. Integers are numbers that don't have decimals. So here, no decimal of any kind. No decimal. Okay, could be positive or negative, but right here, that's an integer, that's an integer, that's an integer. No decimals. So the fractions, they are rational, they are real numbers, but they are not integers. Okay. And then non-integers. So these are integers here. This group right there, integer. These ones over here, non-integer. All right. Now the family of integers breaks apart. And how do they break apart? Well, they break apart as positive and negative. So we can call this negative integers and whole numbers. Negative integers and whole numbers, right? So when somebody says what is a whole number, well, a whole number is a non-negative integer. A non-negative integer. A non-negative integer. So we see up here, I'm running out of colors here, so I'm going to highlight them. So if I highlighted the whole numbers, so this one here is a whole number. That is a whole number, example of whole numbers. Of course, there are lots more, right? So example of whole numbers would be 0, 1, 2, 3. So they're integers, meaning they have no decimals, but they're also not negative. Okay, so I use that odd phrasing. I didn't say positive because 0 is neither positive or negative. So when you say non-negative, that includes the 0. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. These are all whole numbers. Those are examples of whole numbers. And of course, you know the negative integers, they would be minus 1, minus 2, minus 3, and so on. Now these whole numbers, they break up too into two parts. They break up how? They break up as 0 and they break up as natural numbers. Natural numbers. So what are natural numbers? Well, they are positive integers. These are positive integers. Okay, and these are called natural numbers. I'm just going to guess that they got their name because these are probably the first numbers anybody came up with, right? I mean, who thinks of negative numbers initially? Nobody. 1, 2, 3, 4 is natural, right? Even the concept of 0 is a really strange idea of nothingness. So natural numbers are positive integers, and so examples, of course, are easy. In this case, the examples are 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Okay, so let's take a look at a very simple problem for us to do. Um, let's say we were given a set of numbers, example -6, a set of numbers -3/4, radical 5, -0.5, 0, 4, 9.2, 5, and say 5/8, and minus radical 13. Okay, and we were asked simple question: what are the natural numbers, right? So what are the natural numbers? Now remember, natural numbers are sort of the most elemental, the simplest, the most basic numbers. So these are numbers that are positive integers, as you can see up above there, positive integers, right? So from this set, I'm going to look for positive integers. So 0 is tricky, it's not it. So 4 is a positive integer. That's 9.2, it's positive but not an integer. So that's about it. That's the only natural number we have. Next, let's talk about whole numbers. So what are the whole numbers that are in this group? Whole numbers that are in this. So now remember, whole numbers are both the natural numbers as well as the 0. So if I look through this thing, so natural number, I can write it down because I know whole numbers consist of natural numbers and 0, and if there is a 0, well, that's part of the answer as well. So they are there, whole numbers in that group. Okay. Now what about the integers? Right? Integers. Okay. So integers are anything that does not have a decimal. So in this case, the -6. Going through this thing here, 0, 4, those are all integers. Next, let's talk about rational numbers. So I'll go over here. Okay, so now rational numbers are a little trickier. Okay, so rational means anything that has well, it's easy in a sense to think of irrationals, the ones that it's not. Irrationals are things that have a decimal place that goes on forever but does not repeat. So I can sort of look at this and answer the irrational question first. So let's write that down. And everything that's not an irrational will then be a rational, right? So let's answer the question of irrational numbers first. So 6 has a decimal place. 3/4 has a decimal place that stops. Okay, radical 5. Now that's an irrational number. Okay, 0.5 is rational, 0 is rational, 4 is rational, 9.2, 5/8. If it's a fraction, remember, if it's a fraction, the decimal will either repeat and go on forever with a pattern, or it will stop. -13. So those are the only two irrational numbers. So everything other than those two would be a rational number. So the rational numbers in our little list here are -6, -3/4, not the radical 5, minus 0.5, 0, 4, 9.2, 5, and 5/8, and that's it. Those are our rational numbers. So if we weed out the irrationals, which are a little easier to find or identify, then we can say what's left is the other rationals. And then, of course, the last one is what are the real numbers that we have here? Well, the real numbers are all the numbers that we have. So in this case, that would be minus 6, minus 3/4, radical 5, minus 0.5, 0, 4, 9.2, 5 and 5/8, minus radical 13. Okay. If you're wondering what these little squirrely brackets that I've put there, I put them on all of these. That is just like a basket, a symbol for what's called a set, if you want to get technical. A set is nothing but just a container, a symbol that says here, these are all the collection of answers, a container full of my answers. All right, I hope that helps identify the family tree of real numbers for you.